Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this session with Paola Pampaloni, who is Deputy Managing Director in the European External Action Service, responsible for Asia-Pacific. And Paola will be talking with us this evening about some of the challenges, particularly that the European Union faces in this region. As some of you who were here at our earlier careers session already know, Paola's had a long and distinguished career in the EU institutions and previously in UNDP and a number of other positions, which means she has immense experience. We were colleagues together working on enlargement and particularly the Balkans quite some years ago in the Commission. And so it's a special pleasure for me to welcome her here this evening, as there were moments of uncertainty with a general strike today in Belgium and a lot of excitement as to whether or not the plane would leave and at what time, but she made it, which is really the essential thing. Paola's going to speak to us for maybe a quarter of an hour or so, and then we'll move on to a dialogue. We have a student panel who've agreed to initiate our dialogue by asking some questions. Also, Sydney Robner, who is in isolation but is with us online this evening. And I'd like to say to those of you who are following the discussion online that I would invite you to pose your questions through the Q&A function at any time. And I will filter your questions into the dialogue at the appropriate moment when we touch on the subjects that you are asking questions about. So Paola, thanks for being with us this evening. And without more ado, let me give you the floor.
Thank you, Michael. And you can hear? Yes. Thank you, Michael. So I will try to, you were asking me if I wanted to present something through slides. I don't have the time to prepare slides. You have me, and you can ask all questions. And I wanted really to have an open discussion with you on the basis of what I am doing, and maybe try to understand what could be also your interest. Being the director for Asia and Pacific with Michael, I said what I can try to explain is a little bit the role of the European Union in this part of the world. We talk a lot about the role of the European Union in our neighborhood, in the Western Balkans, but there are questions how the European Union can be an actor in an area where there is lots of competition also by other important countries. And since we have very recently adopted our new Indo-Pacific strategy, I said maybe we can use in our new strategy to explain a little bit how we can see the role or the potential role that the EU has in this part of the world. This strategy was basically one milestone, like also our President of the European Commission said, because for the first time this year, the strategy was adopted in two steps, a first adoption in April of this year, and a joint communication with many more details that was adopted on the 15th of September. What was the main political message? Europe must be present in Asia and Pacific before everybody is taking advantage of this important part of the world. For Europe, not only the neighborhood has a strategic importance, but there is a geopolitical interest in be more vocal, more present, more interactive with the country of the Indo-Pacific. When we talk about Indo-Pacific, we talk about the East Africa until Samoa. Samoa is the eastern part of the Pacific. So is that region that is facing the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Being also myself responsible for the Pacific, I'm director for Asia and Pacific, I can tell you that when I travel with lots of difficulties because it's 2 days of trip to reach the Pacific. When you go to the Pacific and you try to explain what is the European Union, they look at you and say, well, what are you doing here? They look at us for many years. In this period, at least I was working with many of these islands and government of the Pacific. They looked at us as a donor. We are providing lots of financial assistance. We have lots of projects. And for many years, this country, especially the least developed country in the far away Pacific, they were looking at the European Union as a contributor to the development of their own country, but not as a political actor. The political actor was different. There was an important influence of China. There have been even before an influence of the US in the Pacific. And the EU was present in the Pacific. And this is always what we say. We have a territory of the European Union, France, in the Pacific. So we are also in the Pacific. But we were not be very assertive in our role. So after lots of discussion and internal little by little step to put our nose and step into the Pacific, we decided to issue this new strategy. And the new strategy means we want to be there, how we want to be there. And there are a number of areas that we have highlighted, which are very new. And then very often I receive the question and say, okay, but what you are doing in the security, what you are doing in this and that? Well, this strategy has just been adopted in September. So we are at a very early stage of this implementation. And we're working very hard in this implementation. The strategy doesn't provide a completely new area of interaction with the region of Asia and the Pacific, but was almost an inventory of all what we were doing or we are planning to do, put under the same umbrella. Some ideas are new, but the majority of the ideas in this strategy are activity that we were already doing before. And then we said, well, 70% of the global trade is done between us and this region. 50% of the population of the world is in this Indo-Pacific area. 60% of the global GDP is also in the Indo-Pacific region. So there is a very high interest in terms of trade or foreign policy that was giving us an incentive to look at this area more in a strategic way. And consider that 40% of all the trade, the foreign trade, is passing through the South China Sea. Our own ships, European ships, are passing through the South China Sea. And you probably know very much that there is an ongoing disputes in the South China Sea, where China is very assertive. And if for us, if China is controlling the South China Sea, we are going to lose 40% of our trade passing through this part of the world. And we are trying to see to be a little bit more cooperative with the countries of the region to work together to establish a sort of a international rule-based order in this part of the world. The strategy has 7 priorities. So we have 7 priorities now we are trying to implement. The first priority is on trade. What we are trying to do is to diversify also our trade relations with the country. And we have, in a number of cases, a number of trade agreements. We have trade agreements with Korea, with Japan, and we are already with Singapore, which are quite important trade agreements. And this is the implementation of this trade agreement, or the better implementation of the opportunity that this trade agreement are giving to us, is something that we are taking into account. But then we are also trying to finalize ongoing trade negotiation. And we are in trade negotiation with Australia and New Zealand. Australia now we have postponed after the recent incident. But there are still ongoing negotiations that we are trying to finalize as quickly as possible, or as also the political situation would allow. And we are also try to strengthen our rule to protect international trade against unfair practice. And this unfair practice, and we are fighting very much, are industrial subsidies, economic coercion, forced technological transfer, and intellectual property theft. These have been identified in our strategy as the main challenges in the region. So that is what we call the sustainable and inclusive prosperity, which is the first pillar of our strategy. The second pillar of our strategy is the green transition. You know, the European Union is very much focusing on the Paris Agreement, the implementation of Paris Agreement. We have been considered as the champion of advocating implementation of all the provision of the Paris Agreement, and not only, but try to be even more ambitious than what the Paris Agreement was provided. And we did lots of work in terms of bilateral outreach with the countries of the world, and we try to focus also in preparation of the Glasgow COP with the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific, they are our best ally in the climate change, in the fight against climate change. And we have identified a number of areas where we would like to work with the country of this part of the world, and it's not only on the climate change, but also on the counter of the biodiversity losses, on the pollution, and on all the forms of environmental degradation. And this also require a number of what we call the partnership. We do not go to Glasgow. We didn't go to Glasgow like this alone. But before going to Glasgow, I have to tell you that a number of phone call and a high-level meeting and strategic discussion with the country of the Indo-Pacific have been endless. Try to encourage to be very ambitious on the NDC, the National Determined Contribution, to increase the level, because as it is the situation today, we are very far away from our target. Even the outcome of COP26 is not very satisfactory for us. But we are probably the biggest engine that we have in the world. Now also the Americans are joining us in this big battle. And we wanted to bring the country of the Asia and Pacific on board. And for us, it's very easy with the Pacific, because the Pacific Islands are sinking, and all the cities, the small island, the development states, they made a big alliance, and there are a lot in the Pacific, plus the Maldives and the Indian Ocean, there are a number who are working with us, and they wanted to build alliance with the European Union to go and try to go around and try to be more ambitious in the fight against climate change. There is one of the islands in the Pacific where they are already trying to move the capital from the current level to a hill, because they already foreseen that in few years this capital will be flooded. So they are asking for some support to start rebuilding the old capital above the sea level. The same with the Maldives, who are in a very critical situation, and they have foreseen that in few years, as many of these islands so far they are not inhabited, they can disappear with the raising of the sea level. So green transition is the area where we wanted to intensify our relations with the country of this region. The third pillar is on the ocean governance. We would like to take forward our action on strengthening ocean governance in what I say, in full compliance with international law and the UNCLOS. And I'm talking again about the South China Sea. So there is an important discussion ongoing, especially with some of the countries of ASEAN, but not only with the ASEAN, to try to find or to support a dialogue also with China and find a solution on the basis of international law on the issues of South China Sea. And then we talk about also on the ocean governance about the fishing and fishing rights. We are trying to protect the fish, and this is something that the EU has traditionally already done very much in the Mediterranean, but we are shifting our attention also in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific Ocean, and strengthening our work to fight against illegal fishing, the IUU. This is a new regulation that if a country is not in compliance with a number of criteria under our regulation, we stop the import of fish from that country to the European Union. Since many of these countries are a very big exporter of fish and shrimps to the EU, they are very much interested to comply with this obligation, at least to have a dialogue with the European Union also on this part of the ocean governance. So we are in the process of the implementation of what our agreements that are called the Sustainable Fishery Partnership Agreements, which we have signed with a number of these countries. The fourth pillar is on digital governance and partnership. And this is, we talk about digital. Digital is very important in the area of priority. And there is a growing interest of a number of countries to sign with us a digital partnership. We started already negotiating with Japan, with Korea and Singapore, who have been the first, the most advanced, let's say, partners, strategic partners, who are interested to see how we can work together in the field of digital and try to strengthen our cooperation on research and innovation. And all this is done through opening up our Horizon Europe program. We have a specific program of research where we have put additional funds, and we are trying to encourage the country of Asia, especially this one, to work with our researchers and try to work on the digital dossier. The fifth of the priorities on connectivity. Connectivity, the EU has already adopted a few years ago a strategy on connectivity to connect Asia with the European Union on different area, on digital, on transport. And when we talk about transport, we were always talking about ships or aerial transport. Road a little bit less, and on human people-to-people connectivity, and this was already done through our Erasmus Plus, Erasmus Mundus, that help many thousands of Asian students to come and study in Europe, and we have exchanged also thousands of European students to study in Asian university. So we wanted to step up our funding to help not only sustainable infrastructure linked to the connectivity, but also this people-to-people contact through the different exchange of students. The sixth and the very delicate sixth priority is on the security and defense. This is a new area, and it's not an area where the EU institution, they have the responsibility. We are not, this is a competence of the member states. And I would like to highlight here that when we talk about the presence of the EU in Asia, it's not only about the EU institution, but is the EU plus the 27 member states. And when we talk about security and defense, it's very important, and I highlight that this is a general consensus of the member states themselves who would like to step up their own presence in this part of the world, and try to promote what we call the open and rule-based regional security architecture, in helping, or let's say including a secure sea line of communication, capacity building, and enhance a naval presence. We have done in the Indian Ocean already a number of joint operations with some of the Asian countries, with Korea, and this was done during Atalanta operation, against the piracy. We have invited the country of Asia to join with the ships to have this joint patrolling of the critical area in the Indian Ocean against piracy, and was quite useful. And we have received even more and more requests from a number of countries that they wanted to do this joint operation with the, okay, Atalanta is a CSDP mission, but they want also to have with the national initiative by the French. The French, they are regularly sending ships to the South China Sea or in the Pacific. And now we could see also if there is any interest to have this joint exercise with the Navy of our member states and some of the Asian country. In particular, these are the biggest one. Why we wanted to do this? There are a number of areas that we would like to join the efforts with the Asian. Is to link to counterterrorism, to cyber security, also to enhance the defense. And we have offered the country also to ensure or to strengthen the capacity of maritime security, so to ensure maritime security in the different area. And I talk again about cybersecurity, which is one of our big priority in order to tackle the cyber crime. And I say cybercrime is one of the top of the priority that we have nowadays. So we are trying to work together also in this field. And the last and the seventh priority is on link to health and to what we have seen with the COVID pandemic. And we realize that we have to work together, what we call the human security. Human security is for the EU to work together with the partners of this region to support the healthcare system, and in particular to prepare for an eventual new pandemic. This pandemic, everybody knew that this could have happened, but nobody was seriously looking at the reality of how devastating the pandemic could have been for the entire world. So it happened, and it may happen again. And that's why when was last week, the president of the European Council, Charles Michel, and the Secretary General of WHO, they opened the negotiation of this new pandemic treaty to prepare for eventual future pandemic. I don't know how many countries they will join in the negotiation of this treaty, but there is a very high interest and acknowledge that this unfortunately will not be the last time. But the next time we need to be better prepared. And in this field, we would like to build again a special partnership with the country of the region. And this is not only on the human security, it's not only on the let's say on the COVID, but also on the natural disaster, to work together to face or to reinforce the disaster risk reduction and preparedness of a number of countries to cope with the disaster, typhoon, earthquake, and that's it. So these are the 7 priorities in our strategy. The key question are a number are partnership that we have established and dialogue that we have with a number of these countries. In another case, we have also the money. Said who is going to finance, because we needed to develop a number of projects, and we have started now with a new multi-annual indicative program that is defining the activity of the funds for the next 7 years. And there are a number of funds, not much, but there are funds for supporting the dialogue with the Pan-Asia country, so the country for the implementation of the Indo-Pacific strategy. So we are at this stage in the moment of defining with each of these countries in what type of project we could implement in the next 7 years. So that's why I said it's very early. The strategy has been adopted in September, and we are at this stage in the finalization of the multi-annual indicative program for the next 7 years. And in addition, for the infrastructure, we will have a quite a big amount of money under still the new indici instruments, the EDSF Plus, that is an investment fund, which is planning to co-finance investment together with the IFIs, with the World Bank, EIB, EBRD, in the country of the region on the basis of sustainability. We are also trying to convey the message that all our investment within the umbrella of this Indo-Pacific strategy will need to comply to a number of principles and values that are very much in the hearts of the EU. One is the respect of human rights and labor rights. So investment we do in full respect of ILO Convention on Labor. And second, on the sustainability. We are not going to put this country, especially LDC, in a very difficult situation to repay back loans to us. So if we offer loans, these loans will be sustainable and not creating a dependence of the country to reach a situation that they cannot pay back and they will be obliged to go for other options like maybe other countries of the region are doing. So this is a little bit in a short what we are working in this period, and in particular what we are going to do in the future, in the very near future.
Well, Paola, thank you for that terrific overview. I'm sure we'll come to some more specifics, both on the details of the strategy, but also on countries. And we have some students who are ready to ask a few questions. Maybe first on the strategy. Kevin, would you like to come in? Introduce yourself briefly, maybe.
Thanks. My name is Kevin Wang. I grew up between China and the US, and thank you so much for coming today. And I'll start with my first question. As you mentioned earlier about EU's promoting the Indo-Pacific strategy in the sense of regional security architecture, I was wondering, without an official military presence, what are some concrete policy the EU can, as an official entity, can actually follow through outside of, for example, individual member states joint exercises? On top of that, I was wondering, do Indo-Pacific countries buy into the EU's conception of a rules-based approach to trade and regulatory issues? Thank you.
We have already done a number of these joint exercises. As I said, Atalanta has been the first, and we are inviting, in Atalanta you have a number of member states, and then the command is in one member state. Now the command is in Spain. Before it was in the UK, then was moved to Spain after Brexit. And we have invited, and I have to say there are a number of the countries, including Pakistan, for example, who will be very much interested to join this joint operation in the sea. And we have done in the Pacific, and this was done by a French ship, and the French, they invite on the same ship different participants or uniform officials from the different member states. So it was a sort of a joint operation, and they were navigated in that part of the world, in particular around the South China Sea, to show a little bit of assertiveness. And again, the basic principle is to promote a rule-based international order. That is the reasons of all this security. If the country are in agreement or not with this principle, difficult to say. Depends on which country you have in mind. The country of the Indo-Pacific, which are in this southern part of the globe, in the bilateral discussion that we have, they are all in favor of a rule-based international order. To the point that, for example, the Philippines or Malaysia, who are very close to the South China Sea, are requesting very much the support of the EU and like-minded countries of the region to try to promote a principle of a rule-based international order. And you know that there is an ongoing discussion about a code of conduct for the passage or for the free passage in the South China Sea. that is under discussion within the ASEAN members, and we are very much supporting this discussion and the definition of a code of conduct under the principle of the UNCLOS and the international law. So there is a general consensus. Maybe not all countries they have they are following this principle, I would say.
Thanks, Paola. Is Vincenzo with us? Vincenzo, I think you've got a follow-up.
Thank you for coming here. I'm Vincenzo and I'm from Italy. So in spite of its new Indo-Pacific strategy, there are still European member states that set their own strategy and pursue their own goals. And some other states, Hungary, Poland, Greece, tend to be more pro-China than others. Some others tend to have more nuanced position still towards China. So to what extent do you think that diverging interests are affecting the efficacy of the action of the EU towards its engagement in the Indo-Pacific?
You didn't mention the countries, but I guess you know what you mean. Yes.
I think you did. Maybe you mentioned them a little bit quickly, but you.
You said, sorry, I didn't.
Hungary, Poland, Greece. Did you mention? I think
Greece.
you mentioned that with respect mainly to their policy towards China, but I mean the basic question is whether the strategy, I think, which is drawn up by the institutions, has the wholehearted support of the member states. I mean, do they have divergences among them on these issues, or can you count on the full backing of all the member states?
You are right to say there are also other strategies, because we have not been the first to issue this strategy, but there were, I think the German have been the first, and the French are very keen, and there have been a strategy that were incentivizing the EU to come out with our own strategy. At the beginning, we have been cautious to come out with this Indo-Pacific strategy, because the wording of Indo-Pacific and the Indo-Pacific strategy was used by other countries in Asia in a completely different terminology. So the American, they have their own Indo-Pacific strategy, the Japanese, they have, the Australian, they have. But the strategy called exactly with the same name was an anti-Chinese strategy, was very clearly anti-Chinese. Our strategy is not going against anybody. And this is what we try to promote, our strategy, which is different from other countries who were making a strategy as a sort of alliance on the growing influence of China in this part of the region. We have our own strategy with China. We have a strategy, the EU-China strategy that is adopted by the Council conclusion. And this strategy of 2019 is still our own strategy with China. What we did not have was a strategy on the south of China. So the strategy on that part. China is a complex relations, and we can talk about hours about our relations with China. But the relation with China existed already very much highlighted in this strategy, which is reconfirmed every time that China is in the agenda of a European Council. A Foreign Affairs Council is basically all the council meeting. We have a discussion on China. When we came out with our Indo-Pacific strategy, we said one thing is very much important, that nobody should define this strategy as antagonizing China. China has its own strategy, complex relations, and we discuss later. This is something that we didn't have a strategy in this part of a very important geographical part of the world. As I said, there is I gave you the statistic of why we are interested in this part of the world. And in that respect, this is a long answer to your question. When Hungary, Poland, who are, of course, have a very special contact also with the Chinese counterpart, and they are part of the 16+1 group, they acknowledged the fact that our strategy was not antagonizing China, and we received the full support we were in the negotiation. Of course, the Council conclusion, especially Council conclusion of April, were fully negotiated with the member states. So if you look at the text of the Council conclusion of April on the Indo-Pacific strategy, have been adopted at the unanimity by all countries, including Hungary, Poland, and Greece. So there is a general consensus in the interpretation of the Indo-Pacific strategy that we have put on the table. So this has been welcome, and there has been also welcome. The joint communication was presented at the European Council after the adoption of September, and there was a general endorsement at the European Council of our Indo-Pacific strategy at the unanimity. So this is in that respect, and with this very important caveat that is not going against the interest of anybody, there has been a unanimity, a full support by the country, provided that we do not use this strategy to antagonize our other big strategic partner, which is regulated by his own strategy.
More or less at the same time as the strategy came forward, there have been some important developments, particularly regarding Afghanistan. I think a couple of our students would like to ask you about that. Maybe Sam.
Thank you so much again for coming. My name is Sam. I'm from the US. So with that in mind, I'd love to ask you about your thoughts on the recent US withdrawal from Afghanistan, given your work there, and whether or not the manner of the withdrawal, how it was unilateral, makes the case for greater EU strategic autonomy more generally.
And Max, you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah. I'm Max. I'm from Poland. In her statement following the 13th ASEAN summit, President von der Leyen basically rejected the new regime in Afghanistan and also emphasized the importance of standing by its people. And how can the EU ensure that the humanitarian aid provided by it, which is totaling 300 million euro, is used in the most efficient way possible to help the Afghan population? Thank you.
To our American students. As I said in the previous session, I'm very much involved in Afghanistan, which has cut my holidays from the 15th of August. And this because we were not prepared to such a quick withdrawal by the Americans and the quick taking over by the Taliban in Kabul. So what happened after the 15th of August? We, as the European Union, we had a delegation that was open with quite a number of local staff. And we realized that we did not have, and this is linked also to the strategic autonomy, we realized we didn't have our military forces to extract all our people from our delegation. So we had to rely 100% to someone else, to the Americans and also to our member states, member of NATO who had the troops there. And we knew that because the Americans decide, and that was another element that put us in lots of difficulties, but the Americans unilaterally decide to close, to leave by the end of August. And we all knew that by the end of August, we could not have completed the operation of evacuation of all these vulnerable Afghans who work for 20 years with us, either in the military bases, either in our embassy or for our projects. We have built the capacity of policemen, police women who were in a very, very difficult and vulnerable situation. But there was no possibility to negotiate with the Americans on this because the Americans negotiated directly with the Taliban and not with the allies with whom we have been in the country from the beginning. So said this, they helped us a lot because they kept the airport open. And we managed to extract around 500 Afghans who were working plus with the family who work in our embassy, in our delegation, using the American flights, but mainly member states flight. And this created the question, the big question about the strategic autonomy. If something happened, and this happened already not only with the Kabul, but happened also during the COVID crisis, when the lockdown happened and we had thousands and thousands of Europeans all around Europe, we had to help them to come back. And since we don't have military forces per se, was very difficult to go ahead also with this evacuation operation if you don't have an autonomy, or what we call the strategic autonomy, to continue to operate as European Union and not to be 100% dependent on someone else, either by NATO or by the Americans in particular. So there is this concept that now is very much under development, because there will be crisis in the future. And we need to be able, even in future crises, of course we have allies, and the US is one of our biggest allies. The transatlantic alliance is the strongest that we have in the EU. But even if we have this important alliance, you could see with experience of Afghanistan that we needed to be able to operate also on our own in the 27 member states. So we are studying this. I don't say that there is a solution. You have seen that there has been a new decision on the strategic compass that has been presented by to the Council, to the Foreign Affairs Council, joined with the Defense. And we hope that this strategic compass will come to life, let's say, at the mid of next year. Don't know exactly, I don't remember the date, but there will be a plan in the first half of next year to have our new strategic compass that is a translation in practical terms of this strategic autonomy that we are trying to put in place. Your question is the regime and how we deal with the current regime. After the taking over of the Taliban and the council and the minister, they met in September, and they came out with a conclusion, which are the guidance on our activities vis-a-vis the Taliban. So there are 5 principles given by our member states on the basis of which we can engage with the Taliban. First of all, we cannot recognize the Taliban. The Taliban government will not be recognized, but they accept that a critical engagement can be done. The second principle is on continue promotion of human rights, women's rights, education for girls. So that's every engagement that should include a strong request to the Taliban to continue to guarantee the human rights and women's rights to the population. We also need to get the guarantee from the Taliban that the territory will not be used for terrorist attack against country outside Afghanistan. Then we have the agreements on the humanitarian that again we can start the engagement to allow our humanitarian assistance to be delivered without any political interference. And this is, I will tell you afterwards what we have done. And the last point is that the Taliban will need to continue to allow us the safe passage. We don't like to call it evacuation. Also, the Americans, they don't like to call it evacuation. But all those Afghans who have regular traveling documents who want to come to Europe and they have a visa, they should allow to leave the country. So under the basis of these 5 principles, we have received the authorization from the member states to start engaging with the Taliban. And last week there was a first meeting in Doha, not at the political level, was a more level of our special envoy, who went to Doha with 4 women, 4 head of division, because all people who are going to talk to the Taliban, they only bring men. So we decided in the European Union, if we mean to say that we wanted to have women's rights, we had decided to send a delegation to Doha, and the Taliban came to Doha in a big group. And the special envoy had the 4 head of unit women who start interacting, and in particular to request the condition for the delivery of the humanitarian assistance. We do not pass through the Taliban for humanitarian assistance, but we wanted to make sure that agency, NGO, local organization, and we work a lot with the UN, with the Red Cross, they would be allowed to provide all this food aid, medicines, and basic needs without any political consideration. And so this was very much done by actually my colleague. We were very determined in passing this message. And the meeting went quite well, a part of the principle of the Taliban on the Islamic states and the Emirates. But there has been at least a door open for this engagement last week.
Thanks, Paola. Would anyone else like to come in on Afghanistan before we move on to something else? Maybe some of the students here or online? Well, while you think about that, Paola, we have a couple of questions about China. I know it's a little bit beyond your mandate, but would you be ready to take them a little bit? Yeah, Max?
Yes. Thank you. My question would be, how may EU-China relations evolve in the next couple of years? A very broad question, and I know you mentioned the not antagonizing principles, but will we see a more competitive and less cooperative approach from the EU? Thank you.
Kevin, would you like to come in?
My question is, in the context of China being EU's largest trading partner, and there's a shift from DC of rather than focusing from the transatlantic relationship, but to focus in Asia, do you think this calls for the EU to exercise more influence in this emerging great power competition? On top of what you said about there's consensus in Brussels about this new security autonomy, do you think it is a time to officially update the EFSP? Thank you.
Yeah. CFSP.
CFSP.
The CFSP.
Common Foreign Security Policy.
Common.
Yeah.
It's not yet a Europe. It's not yet a European. You move too fast.
Yeah.
Well, China. I knew you are also interested in China. China is the relationship with China are very complex and are defined by the strategy. As I mentioned, there is a strategy that we have never changed, and we don't want to change the current EU-China strategy adopted by the Council at the unanimity, because if you reopen these documents, it will be very difficult to reach again the unanimity on what we have. So the strategy is very complex, it's still very valid, and we are continuously working on this strategy, which you have heard a million of times, the definition of our partnership with China. China is a partner, China is a competitor, and China is a systemic rival. This is telling you everything about our relations with China. And we do not deny, nobody denied that China is an important, extremely important economic partner for European Union, and the trade is gigantic, is our biggest market, and we are for them also the biggest market. So there is a bilateral interest to maintain these economic relations. And the economic relations are so interrelated that it's very difficult now to change the status quo. Everything is produced. Everything that you produce in Europe, one part is produced in China. Elements that you need for your technology are coming from China. So the interaction of the economy is so much depth that is absolutely impossible to split our relations with China. This will continue to be fundamental and strategic in the years to come. But this should not shy the EU to push back China when it's necessary to push them back. And this is why I said that this is a partner, is a competitor, but it's also a systemic rival. And we have a number of issues of strong disagreement, and the Chinese know very well that these are on human rights, on Hong Kong and Taiwan, just to give you the main points. And every time that you have seen how many statements we are coming up, of course, China does not appreciate too much or doesn't like that we go public and we push back publicly. But we do, we continue to defend our important values. And this is something that will be, if China wants to do business with Europe, they have also to take this part of Europe, Europe with its values and its principle. I am personally the chair of the human rights dialogue with China, EU-China. I was, because now after the sanction, they don't want to talk to us anymore. But I did for many years, and I can tell you it's a very difficult meeting to discuss Xinjiang, Tibet, human rights, the rule-based order with China. Is meeting that lasts for 10, 12 hours in one day and was done once a year. Unfortunately, we couldn't maintain this annual event after the situation becomes so tense in our relations to the point that we had to impose a sanction for the situation in Xinjiang. When the sanction was imposed by us last year, China on the same day, 1 hour after, impose atomic sanction against the PSC, the Political and Security Committee. So they impose a sanction to all the 27 member states. The Committee of Human Rights, the Committee of the European Parliament, plus a number of think tank and other national parliaments. So while our sanction was very much targeted on the situation of Xinjiang, the reaction of China was atomic, putting sanction to basically the whole EU. And from that moment, the relations have been very difficult. Our dialogue, human rights dialogue, has been de facto suspended because we are trying now to resume some discussion with the Chinese. But for 6 months, things were not really going at the best. And now we have very recently had a meeting at the highest level of the High Representative with the Foreign Minister, the State Councillor Wang Yi, which has reopened a little bit the channel of communication with China. And we are preparing for the next summit that should happen very, very soon. At the same time, we are in discussion with the US and we have opened a dialogue on China, EU-US dialogue on China. And the meeting just happened last week with our Secretary General Stefano Sannino and the Deputy State Secretary Wendy Sherman, Secretary of State. So there is also this discussion with the US to see how we can deal with China together. So it's true that the US is dealing with China, but it's not true that they are forgetting their ally. And actually they have a very much interest of the US to continue to talk with us also about the challenges they are also facing in these particular issues on human rights and Hong Kong and Taiwan with us. So this is what I can say.
Thank you, Paola. Sydney is with us online, I think, had a question also about the EU's pushback. You mentioned sanctions, but there's also a more strategic approach from the EU. Sydney, are you with us? And would you like to ask your question? Can you unmute yourself? Okay, well, Sydney's in isolation, unfortunately, and I hoped she was going to be able to be. Well, she seems to be here.
Maybe you don't have the volumes.
Huh?
Press. What is press?
Oh, I see. Okay, I thought you were. Oh, okay, there we go.
Okay. Hi.
There we are. Okay, Sydney.
Yes, of course. Hi. My name is Sydney. I'm so sorry I can't be there in person, but I wanted to talk to you about the Global Gateway Initiative and how might that impact relations in the Indo-Pacific with the EU and as a contrast with the other global power in the region, such as China. And I wanted to ask what the role of the External Action Service might play in this initiative.
Maybe I'll say a couple of words if you permit me, Paola, and maybe you could just say what's likely to be the role of the EAS and all of that. Thank you,
Look,
Sydney. Well,
I have also the Global Gateway brochure for all those who want to have it.
Oh, yeah.
You can have it afterwards.
We always have beautiful publications. You know, Sydney, I think this is an effort by the EU at a kind of strategic response to the Belt and Road Initiative. It's very new. There are a lot of questions that one can ask about it. What's its real strategic goal? In the Belt and Road Initiative, I think it's pretty clear in terms of connectivity, linking up to China in the end. So what is our vision? Is our vision also to promote kind of connectivity, transport, communications, digital, whatever, linked into the European Union? Is it our intention to use our regulatory role as well as trade agreements to try and link these countries in with Europe? Are we thinking of agreements more ambitious than simply trade agreements, going much further? I think there are a lot of basic questions that can still be asked. There's also the question about money, of course, and the Belt and Road Initiative, which has run into many problems, as we know, lots of white elephant projects, ignoring of environmental aspects, not generating local employment, lots of problems we've seen in the Balkans and elsewhere. I don't know if one could say it's running out of steam, but it's certainly running into challenges. So if the European Union is trying to develop its own policy along these lines, then can we overcome these types of issues? The amount of money involved is also something that can be discussed. There are different versions. I don't know what you have, Paola, in terms of the amount of money that's going into Belt and Road, but 100 billion a year, overall over 20, 30 years, maybe 2 trillion, more or less the size of the Italian economy. I mean, what the EU is proposing is something like 300 billion over 7 years. But in a way, it's a kind of typical EU package where there are some existing funds, but especially where we are hoping that a relatively modest contribution from the EU itself would trigger private sector involvement. This was the model for the so-called Juncker Fund inside the EU and for many other initiatives. So, the amounts of money and how they'll be mobilized are also questions. So I don't think there's any simple answer at this point. I think it's good that the EU at least is thinking strategically, but I suspect that what's been put on the table is only a first cut at this, and it's got to go through a lot of further reflection before it becomes really concrete. But Paola, I don't know if you agree with that, and particularly the question about what's the role of the EEAS?
Yes. Well, first, the global gateways is the follow-up of our connectivity strategy. So we had I tell you a little bit of the history that happened that you don't see. We had this Asia EU connectivity strategy, and then was just a master of principle, as I mentioned before, is even part now of our Indo-Pacific. So the connectivity strategy is one element of the Indo-Pacific. But without the money, you don't connect anything. So there was a lot of thinking after the strategy was issued on how to finance the connectivity. And then we were thinking through the multi-annual indicative program I mentioned also before, that we are in this 7-year program. But that's not enough. You cannot finance connectivity just with development funds. The cost of connecting Europe to Asia is gigantic. So there was an idea to start preparing a paper on how to, what tools we have in order to implement the connectivity. And in the talk with the member states, and that's why at a certain moment it came out from not the ES, but from Asia and Pacific, because I was very much involved in the drafting of the connectivity strategy. But then they decided to go for the global gateway that is not only connecting Europe to Asia, is connecting Europe with the rest of the world. And in that respect, when Michael said that I am not the author of the global gateway, because I am the author of anything that is related to Asia. This is much wider than Asia. It's really is an offer that the president herself, and this is what's very much wanted by the President von der Leyen, that she said, I offer to the rest of the world to connect with Europe in terms of investment or in terms of partnership. So there are many ways we can connect. And then she put on the table this 300 billion euro for the 7 years, which is a gigantic amount of money. It's not only money that is coming from the development, from the Indici, let's say, budget and envelope, but also from the Team Europe initiative. One of the big elements that we have in our new development assistance, and this is for Asia Pacific, but is also for the rest of the world, is that we have tried to define a number of priorities. For example, fight against climate change is a priority for us, for all the 27 member states. So we pulled together all the funds for the EU and the different member states who wants to help, I don't know, one country in Thailand or even in Pakistan. And we create the Team Europe initiative, which is our money plus the money of the member states who want to join us in the same initiative. The Global Gateway is going a little bit with this philosophy. We put a number of principles for the connectivity, and we ask the member states to join the efforts to connect Europe with the rest of the world on the basis of a number of principles. And I would like to, and if you want, you can have the paper, the brochure, but there is one key element that is important because it's also in the connectivity strategy that is in this new document, and are the principles that are behind this approach. And the principle, when we put so much money to connect with Europe, is done, and this can be done in the digital and transport, health, education, what we have discussed also before, but will have to be done under the principle of sustainability, and also respecting this value as standards, including rule of law, human rights, labor rights. So whatever every euro that is spent under the Global Gateway will have to be spent on the basis of this principle. Some, they were accusing us that this is a sort of the reaction to the Belt and Road Initiative. You can see in this way, because the Belt and Road Initiative is putting money, but they don't have the principle. The principle are economic investment and concessional loans. We don't do that. We put money, we try to put money in investment. We are asking the country, also in the Asia and Pacific, you want to work with us, you want to interested to connect, a new port, you want to build a new port for improving the connection and improving the trade with the European Union. Yes, so we put the money, but it's also under the principle of good governance, transparency, respect of labor rights. If you put money for a construction of an infrastructure, green, all money, again, every euro that is under the Global Gateway must be put in investment that is sustainable in terms of green and clean. So this can be a circular economy investment in that field, should be security focused, so should be that security in terms of you need also environmental impact assessment, that you don't build a port that can create a natural disaster afterwards and you give a privilege to the economy rather than the protection of the environment. And this is again in the Global Gateway. And then it's also try to catalyze private investor, because we cannot do all this infrastructure only ourselves, but it's also putting maybe some grant money to mobilize private investor, and this will be the big part of the money is coming from the private investment. And we are trying to connect the private investor maybe to the beneficiary country who are interested to have investment from the EU. Just to give you an example, when I travel in the region, one of the things I always receive is that please bring your expert on the energy renewable or the clean energy, because we have among the best technology and expert. So there is always very much an interest in Asia to collect or to have technology to go for this renewable that we have developed probably earlier than many others because of our big priority on the Paris agreements. So this is a little bit the philosophy behind the Global Gateway.
But Paola, looking back also on your whole career and thinking of some of the other areas where the EU has tried to impose this kind of more for more sort of approach, as after the Arab uprisings and so on. Do you think that the EU in general has the leverage necessary to get partners around the world to buy into our agenda, so to speak? And if the Chinese are offering support without conditions, are we strong enough to convince them to adopt these principles?
Times will tell us, but what I notice that also countries who are very close to China, they have a very strong interest in trading with us, because we have a market more interesting than the market that China is offering. So they are interested to do business with us. All the garment sector in all this country, they are exporting to the EU. They don't export to China. China is exporting to the EU, but Cambodia is not exporting garment well, Cambodia now we have suspended also our EBA, but Vietnam is exporting all the textile to the EU. So despite they may have different values and principles for sure that we have, they look at us, and we have an FTA with Vietnam, which is very good and very ambitious, and very stable. So there are lots of our investors, they go to Vietnam to place order for import of textile and goods and garment to the EU. So there is an interest to work. And of course, this is what I say, you have a market, but the market comes with a price. And the price is, you have to respect our values and labor rights. So I don't say they are jumping of joy and they are immediately buying, but they have an economic interest that is probably above the reluctance to accept all these values and principles.
That's convincing. We're approaching the end of our discussion. There are a few questions that I know students would still like to come to. Vincenzo, you wanted to ask about regional cooperation. Would you like to share your question now?
Yeah, my question was actually pretty connected also to what Professor Lee asked just right before. So you mentioned before that the EU with this strategic partnership is trying to formalize its engagement more in Southeast Asia rather than the North, because in the North has already long-standing partnerships. And recently the RCEP has been signed. Do you think that the European Union can leverage it somehow? Is it going to make the job harder or easier for the EU to negotiate with countries in Southeast Asia?
Maybe you could just share with other students RCEP.
The Regional and Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So the trade agreement that was signed between China, Japan, South Korea, and all of the countries in Southeast Asia.
You want my opinion? This is my opinion, and I repeat, it's not the official opinion. I don't think that these trade agreements could really compete with a number of bilateral agreements that we have for the same reasons that I mentioned before. Our market is very important for this country, and probably is it's the second biggest market that in the world. So you are trying you will see that the RCEP has not entered into force. I think it is entering into force on the 1st of January. So we will check what will be the consequences. But you have already seen that India stepped back and they didn't want to join this big regional agreements. They have made their own evaluation and their own reasons. This agreement is not very ambitious. It's not ambitious like our free trade agreements that we have with a number of countries. So it's much more useful for the country who are also signatory of this regional trade agreement. It's more useful to have our own bilateral FTA. And I repeat, we have to see, because we cannot evaluate yet the functioning of these regional agreements, because we have not yet data. So this is a little bit projection of a possibility. The countries inside this agreement are quite different. And again, there are no basic sustainability principle inside this agreement. It's very much based on a very basic trade provisions and not very ambitious. So we'll see. I will, if I come back in 1 year, I can tell you if.
Good. Thank you, Paola. Well, I think we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but if there's a last question anyone's dying to ask, This is your opportunity. Please.
Maybe I can ask a question. Just since we're talking about.
Would you introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, sure. My name is Filippo. I'm Italian and German student here. And I just wanted to ask a follow-up question on the free trade agreement in the region and connected to the RCEP agreement. And I was wondering, the European Union has in the past always tried to negotiate a region-to-region free trade agreements, where in general have a region-to-region engagement with other parts of the world. For example, in Africa, it has tried that with the EPAs, even though it has not been very successful in some instances. And I was wondering, for the ASEAN countries, for example, there's also this ambition or idea that at some point there is going to be an agreement with the region and with the EU. And I was wondering why, in your opinion, has that not happened yet? Why have they continued to have these bilateral agreements? Thank you.
Well, it's not that it's completely out of our agenda, the FTA with ASEAN. It's simply that we had decided to go step by step. The first step was to have a strategic partnership with ASEAN, and it was not easy. It took several years to convince all the ASEAN members to sign this strategic partnership with the EU. Immediately after, other countries, they wanted to have a strategic partnership because ASEAN is a very important market. ASEAN is an important market, and we have a special interest. We didn't touch very much about one of the key products of political interest, which are the semiconductor. But lots of foreign policy is based on semiconductor. So I would say that is running the whole world now, who is producing the semiconductor. And ASEAN is producing, altogether, ASEAN are producing probably more semiconductor than Taiwan alone. Taiwan is the biggest and the number one, and that's why we have issues. But now that we have a strategic partnership with ASEAN, and we really believed in the strategic partnership with ASEAN, the idea is to move also, at least to have some free trade agreements with some of the ASEAN countries, which are not easy for many different reasons, but it's not easy to finalize. And then once you have an idea where are the ambition of these 10 countries, we were ready to go ahead with an FTA. But it's still in our agenda, and it's even part, if I'm not wrong, of our Indo-Pacific strategy. We are still talking about the FTA with the ASEAN. Simply that is a gradual approach, and we are not yet there. We are negotiating even the partnership agreements with Thailand. I would say I can tell you it's not easy to finalize an agreement with Thailand on the political side. Once this is done, we will need to move also on FTA with Thailand. Then you have the big elephant in the room, that is Myanmar, and the situation of Myanmar today with the non-recognition of the current government may create problems in the finalization and the signature of all these type of agreements at the regional level.
Thank you, Paola. We've worked you very hard, but we have a last question from Natalia, and then we will wrap up. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm from Italy, and I have a question about the impact of the Belt and Road Initiative in Europe, especially because the main hubs are placed in Poland and Germany. And my question is whether these new railways that are being constructed in Germany and Poland are going to give like a competitive advantage to this country in Northern Eastern Europe with respect to other countries when it comes to trade with China and all goods that are traded by railways. So like I'm thinking about, for example, Germany might gain 1 week, 3-4 days advantage when it comes to trading goods with China if these new railways are actually constructed in that part of the European Union, causing a fragmentation when it comes to trade.
Well, the railway inside the European Union are not just defined or designed in the interest of the trade with China. You know that Michael, you remember the Trans-European Network. This is one of our milestones that was defined when we open up with Eastern Europe. So one of the first things we did already at our time was the connection of the old Europe with the new Europe. And there was a design, really graphic design on all the roads, highway and railway that was agreed between all the member states, including this was a plan that was approved by all the member states because it was linked to a massive amount of money to help the construction of this infrastructure. Now, Germany has an interest and has a very large trade with China, like many other countries. So there has been an interest by Germany also to link with the railway, and also by China to link with Germany. One of the things we always said that we have nothing against, provided our train are coming full of goods from China to Europe, but they should go back to China full of goods as well. While the reality is they come full when they come from China to Europe and they go back empty. So there is still a little bit of discussion. It's not just a question of the railway per se, is the discussion on the opportunity also for our company to have a market in China. The railway per se could be a good idea. It could help the connectivity with another biggest market. The problem is different. The problem is China has not given us the same opportunity for our European investor in China that China has for their own investors in Europe. And so there is no reciprocity, or there is an asymmetric trade that we are in discussion and try to find a solution. The BRI and the construction of any tranche of the BRI, if you want to call it a BRI, in Europe will have to be done in accordance with all the European legislation. So even if the Chinese, they build a bridge in Croatia, like they did, this has to be done on the basis of feasibility study, environmental impact assessment, labor rights, and when the Chinese are operating in Europe, they have to respect our own legislation. They cannot do on the basis of the Chinese legislation for the European territory. At the border, that is another question.
Thank you so much, Paola. You've been so forthcoming. You've been so generous with your time. Thank you to our earlier session on career possibilities. I think the students benefited enormously from that. Thanks to Sam and Max, Kevin, Vincenzo, and Sydney, who asked the question online. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions that you posed, but I think we've had a very far-reaching discussion. And thanks so much for being generous and coming here at such a busy time for you, Paola. And we hope to have you back in a quieter time.
In 1 year, we have to answer to his question on the regional trade agreement.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a nice, and thanks to Natalia and Alessandra as well. Great.